It was a quiet evening when Aisha walked home from her college, her bag swinging lightly against her shoulder. The sun had almost disappeared behind the buildings, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was cool and the streets were slowly emptying as people hurried back to their homes. Aisha, a bright and determined girl, had always preferred walking home rather than taking a bus. It gave her time to think, to plan her future, and to breathe after long hours of study. She lived with her widowed mother, who worked tirelessly as a tailor to support them. Aisha's biggest dream was to complete her education and give her mother the comfortable life she deserved. That day, however, something felt different. She couldn't explain why, but a strange uneasiness filled her heart. Every sound seemed sharper, every shadow seemed longer. She adjusted her scarf and quickened her pace, whispering a silent prayer to reach home soon. Her mother always warned her to return before sunset, but classes had run late and she didn't want to worry her mother with another phone call. As she turned into a narrow lane that led directly to her neighborhood, she noticed footsteps behind her. She tried to stay calm, telling herself it was just another passerby, but the footsteps didn't fade away. They matched her pace, every step echoing louder in her ears. Her heart began to beat faster. She took a deep breath, trying not to panic, but the fear in her chest grew stronger. Suddenly, a voice called out to her from behind. She froze for a moment, debating whether to turn or run. When she finally turned, she saw a stranger standing a few steps away. His expression was unreadable, but his presence made her uneasy. Aisha politely asked if he needed any help, her voice trembling slightly. The man didn't respond clearly. Instead, he moved a little closer, his eyes fixed on her in a way that made her skin crawl. Aisha stepped back, clutching her bag tightly. Her instinct screamed for her to leave. She turned and began walking quickly toward the main road, where she could see the glow of a streetlight. But before she could reach it, she felt a hand grab her arm. Panic surged through her. She shouted for help, her voice echoing down the empty street. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then from a nearby window, a light flickered on. Her cries caught the attention of a woman who lived in the area. That woman immediately shouted for help, and soon, 2 men from the neighborhood rushed out. The stranger, startled by the sudden noise, released Aisha and ran into the darkness. Aisha collapsed to the ground, shaking and crying, overwhelmed by fear and relief. The neighbors gathered around her, comforting her and taking her to her mother's house. When her mother saw her in that condition, she ran to her daughter and hugged her tightly. Tears streamed down both their faces. Aisha could barely speak at first, but when she finally did, her voice was soft and broken. She told her mother everything that happened. Her mother's hands trembled as she listened, but she held her daughter close, whispering that she was safe now. That night, neither of them slept. Every time a sound came from outside, Aisha flinched. Her mother sat beside her, gently stroking her hair, trying to calm her down. The fear was still fresh, but deep down, Aisha felt grateful. Grateful that people had come to help her, grateful that she was still alive. The next morning, her mother went to the local police station and filed a report. The officers listened carefully and promised to find the man. They took Aisha's statement and began investigating the area. It wasn't easy for her to talk about what happened. Every word felt heavy, but she knew it was important. She wanted to make sure that no other girl would have to face the same fear she did. Days passed, and though the police continued their search, the man was not found immediately. Still, Aisha refused to live in fear. Her neighbors began walking her home every evening, ensuring she was safe. The community that once felt distant now became like a family to her. They checked on her often, offering comfort and encouragement. Slowly, Aisha began to heal. Her college teachers noticed the change in her at first. She was quieter, more thoughtful. But soon her old spark returned. She focused harder on her studies, determined to make something of her life. She didn't want fear to define her. She wanted strength to be her story. A few weeks later, one of the neighbors spotted a man who looked like the stranger near the same lane. They quickly informed the police, who arrived within minutes. After a short chase, the suspect was caught. When Aisha saw his picture, her hands trembled, but she nodded firmly. It was him. Justice had finally started to move. When the news spread through the neighborhood, everyone praised Aisha's courage. She had faced something terrifying, yet she chose to stand up instead of hide. Her mother looked at her with pride, eyes filled with tears. "You're my brave girl," she said softly. That day marked a turning point in Aisha's life. She realized that even in the darkest moments there can be light. the light of courage, of community, of hope. She decided to volunteer with a local women's group, helping raise awareness about safety and self-protection. She spoke gently but powerfully, sharing her experience in a way that inspired others to be alert and strong. People listened because her story was real. She didn't exaggerate. She simply spoke from her heart. She reminded everyone that fear can be overcome and even a single voice can bring change. Her journey from that frightening night to becoming a voice of awareness was not easy, but it was meaningful. Each time she passed through that same lane again, she no longer felt powerless. She walked with her head held high, knowing she had faced something terrible and turned it into strength. Her mother watched her from the doorway every evening, smiling with pride as her daughter came home safely. In the end, Aisha's story became one of courage, not fear. It was a story of a girl who refused to let one dark moment define her life. She learned that when people stand together, darkness fades faster. Her tears had once been a cry for help, but now they had turned into symbols of resilience. And even though the memory of that night would always stay with her, it no longer ruled her heart, because she had already won the fight within herself. Months passed since that terrible evening, and Aisha's life slowly started to find a new rhythm. The wounds in her heart were still there, but she was learning to live beyond them. Every morning when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the same frightened girl anymore. She saw someone stronger, someone who had faced darkness and refused to let it destroy her. Her mother often told her, "Pain changes people, but courage makes them beautiful." Those words stayed in her mind like a quiet song of hope. Aisha returned to college with a renewed purpose. The first few days were not easy. Her friends treated her with extra care, speaking softly and avoiding certain topics. She appreciated their kindness, but she didn't want their pity. She wanted them to see her as who she was, not a victim, but a fighter. Slowly, she started participating again in group discussions and projects. Her teachers were amazed at how mature and focused she had become. One afternoon, while sitting under the old neem tree in her college courtyard, she wrote in her diary, "Maybe what happened to me was meant to teach me something bigger, not about fear, but about strength." She didn't want to erase her past. She wanted to transform it into something meaningful. Soon after, she got an idea that changed everything. She wanted to start a small awareness group in her college, a space where girls could talk openly about their safety, their fears, and their dreams. At first, she was nervous about presenting the idea, but when she gathered the courage to speak to her principal, he listened carefully and smiled. "That's a brave and much-needed idea, Aisha," he said. "You have my full support." Within a few weeks, her group named Safe Steps was formed. It started with only a handful of students, but word spread quickly. Soon, girls from different departments joined in. They met every week to discuss safety measures, share personal experiences, and learn self-defense basics from trained volunteers. The meetings became a space of unity and encouragement. During the sessions, Aisha often spoke with warmth and honesty. She told everyone that being careful wasn't about living in fear. It was about being aware and strong. Her gentle voice carried power. People respected her because she spoke from her heart, not from a place of anger, but from a place of wisdom. She encouraged every girl to believe in herself and never stay silent when something felt wrong. Her group even organized community events. They invited police officers, social workers, and counselors to guide students about safety, rights, and mental health. The college administration noticed the impact of her efforts and decided to support the initiative officially. For Aisha, it was more than an achievement. It was healing. At home, her mother watched her daughter's transformation with quiet pride. Every time Aisha came home after an event, she would talk endlessly about new plans, new members, and new ideas. Her mother would smile, sometimes with tears in her eyes. She had once feared her daughter would never smile again, but now Aisha's laughter filled their small house like sunlight after a storm. One evening, Aisha and her mother sat on their rooftop drinking tea and watching the sunset. Her mother said softly, "You turned your pain into purpose, my child. That's something not everyone can do." Aisha smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "Ami, I just don't want anyone else to go through what I did," she replied. "If my story can save even one person, it will all be worth it." Not long after, the local news station heard about Safe Steps and decided to do a short feature on it. A reporter came to interview Aisha and her team. Standing in front of the camera, she felt nervous at first, but then she remembered why she had started all this. She spoke clearly and confidently, explaining how awareness and courage could change lives. The segment aired a few days later, and Aisha's story inspired many. Messages of appreciation poured in from people she didn't even know. Her story spread to nearby colleges, and soon, similar groups began forming in other institutions. Aisha's initiative had turned into a quiet movement of awareness and empowerment. She didn't seek fame, she only wanted change. But life has a way of rewarding those who act selflessly. She was later invited to speak at a youth conference on women's safety. When she walked onto the stage, her hands trembled slightly. But the moment she saw the faces in the audience, she felt calm. She shared her story, not as a tale of pain, but as one of survival, hope, and courage. After her speech, many students came to her, thanking her for her bravery. One girl said, "You gave me the courage to speak about what I went through." Hearing that, Aisha's eyes filled with tears. It was the moment she realized her voice had truly made a difference. As the months went by, she continued to balance her studies, her organization, and her home life. Her grades remained strong, and she became known as a role model for others. Even her teachers began using her story as an example of resilience. But Aisha never let pride take over her humility. She often said, "I'm not special, I just refuse to give up." One day, while returning from college, she walked through the same lane where everything had once gone wrong. The memories flashed before her eyes, but this time they didn't scare her. She walked calmly, her steps steady, her eyes forward. That place once filled with fear now represented victory. It was a quiet symbol of how far she had come. Later that evening, Aisha received news from the police that the man who had attacked her was sentenced after a full trial. The message didn't bring her joy or revenge. It brought her closure. She thanked the officers sincerely and prayed for peace in her heart. She knew the past couldn't be changed, but justice had been done. That night, Aisha couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because of peace. She lay awake thinking of her journey, from the night she cried for help to the day she stood as a leader for others. Her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. She had learned that strength wasn't the absence of fear. It was the courage to face it and keep moving forward. Years later, Aisha completed her education with distinction and started working with a national organization that focused on women's empowerment. She traveled to schools and colleges across cities, sharing her message of safety, hope, and unity. People admired her calm spirit and her ability to speak truth without bitterness. Everywhere she went, she reminded young people to look out for each other, to build communities of trust and care. "One kind act can save a life," she would say. Never ignore a cry for help, even if it's just a whisper. At home, her mother often looked at her daughter with tears of joy. She remembered the frightened girl from that night and compared her to the confident woman who now stood before her, strong, calm, and full of light. Aisha's pain had turned into purpose, and her tears had become a symbol of change. In the end, Aisha's story became a lesson for everyone, that darkness doesn't last forever, and even the smallest act of courage can light up a whole world. She proved that strength doesn't come from forgetting pain, but from transforming it into something that helps others. Her journey was not just about survival. It was about victory, faith, and the power of never giving up. And so, every time she heard someone cry for help, she remembered her own voice that once echoed in the night. It reminded her of where she began and how far she had come. That memory no longer brought pain, it brought peace. Because Aisha had learned that true healing doesn't come from hiding scars. It comes from turning them into stories that inspire others to be brave,